Follow traffic, clear visual approach, runway 4 right, maintain 17 John Austin, 5 mile final. 17
An important resource to assist owner pilots and small flight operations. From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan. I'm Rob Finfrock with your trusted source for the very latest business aviation news and information. And speaking of business aviation, those words often bring to mind images of big jets and even bigger flight departments. But even those who've worked in the industry for a while may be surprised to know that small flight operations, often flying a single aircraft and sometimes comprised of just one pilot, represent the largest percentage of the NBAA membership by far. One way that NBAA is committed to serving these members is by the formation of the NBAA Owner-Pilot Association Coalition to strengthen the voices of owner-operator groups and their members on common issues affecting smaller operations. Another valuable resource for these pilots, and the subject of our episode today, is NBAA's Small Operator Learning Series, or SOLS, an online learning resource featuring educational modules geared toward the needs of single pilots and small flight departments. NBAA Operations Manager Noah Yarborough explains.
One of the big reasons that we think the Small Operator Learning Series is so important is because it allows small operators to build a community and come together and try and work to figure out the solution together. And so I think it's really important to see the Small Operator Learning Series as something for small operators, written by small operators, and presented by small operators. So it's people who've gone through the same challenges and the same struggles that you may have as a small operator and have found solutions. And now they're able to help build that community and give back to them.
Also joining me today is Dylan Miller, lead captain on the Bombardier Challenger 350 for a small flight operation. In your experience, Dylan, how do the needs of small flight operations differ from those of larger flight departments?
A really good example is when it comes to managing the maintenance on an airplane. Anyone that has managed the maintenance on an aircraft as a pilot knows that there's a lot of challenges out there. And it's not something that we learn as a pilot, maybe in flight school. How do we get bids for heavy inspections? How do we handle even the routine day-to-day operations of maintenance? That's something that's kind of learned over time. And as Noah had mentioned, small flight departments are often very siloed. And so practices that one small flight department may have, it can be difficult to learn some of those best practices. And so a great example for a small flight department versus a large flight department is that a large flight department might have their own director of maintenance that is managing the maintenance of the aircraft. Well, many small flight departments don't have their own director of maintenance. And so the chief pilot or the lead captain or the department manager may have to assume some of those responsibilities. So how do we generate bids? How do we review them? How do we determine what the best course of action is for a heavy inspection? That's something that we covered in a specific module of the Small Operator Learning Series from maintenance experts that can share some of their tips, tricks, and advice for department managers.
My third guest is Joe Samuedovsky, who co-chairs the Small Flight Department Subcommittee to the NBAA Domestic Operations Committee.
Speaking from a more generalized operation perspective, compared to larger flight departments, a small flight department is doing the same amount of work as their larger counterparts, just with less resources. A large flight department might have multiple aircraft, several pilots, professional flight dispatchers, schedulers, maintenance managers, whereas in a small flight operation, it may just be one or two pilots still doing most of the same work. So with that comes a need to be more efficient while maintaining the same amount of flexibility to serve their flight department. With that, efficiency requires some self-reflection on what the needs of the flight department are. And those needs aren't stationary. They can change over time as the needs of the company that they serve might change. And so to get that efficiency requires communication. Dylan mentioned we had a SOLS module on maintenance, but there's a module on communicating with your principal that I think was very valuable and highlights how a small flight department manager can effectively communicate with their principal, and then in that can gain a lot of perspective on how they can best serve their flight department.
And we'll learn more about SOLS and those modules after this quick message from NBAA.
NBAA Flight Plan listeners, your podcast is ready everywhere. You can download it from iTunes, ask your smart speaker to give you a listen, or hear it in any car with Apple's CarPlay. NBAA Flight Plan, available anytime, anywhere.
We're back now with Noah Yarborough, Dylan Miller, and Joe Samuadovsky, and our discussion about NBAA's Small Operator Learning Series. And picking up where we left off, Joe, how did this program come to be?
The development of the Small Operator Learning Series goes back a few years ago, and it was identified by needing a way to have a collection of resources on some of the core aspects of managing a small flight department. And with being able to record a live interaction between a group of expert panelists, and then having that stored and recorded on the NBAA's learning management site, we realized that that was a great way to develop and then also maintain and distribute learning material that can benefit small flight department managers.
One of the challenges that we see in the industry, especially right now, is that people are often thrust into the position of managing a small flight department without maybe a lot of time as to be mentored. You know, the industry is changing so quickly right now. Folks are changing jobs and moving to different sectors of aviation. And so oftentimes folks find themselves in a position maybe they don't think they're prepared for. So we wanted to have a resource available to people that say, here are some of the basics of managing a small flight department. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let us share our knowledge with you.
Great points, Dylan. And Noah, I think that really makes clear why NBAA offers this resource.
It's really important that the NBAA supports small flight departments. We need outlets and we need ways to allow them to communicate, get their ideas out, learn from each other, because a lot of them, they don't have a director of maintenance. How do we hire maintainers? You know, like a pilot who is now managing an operation may not know how to do that. And so our small flight department subcommittee was created and started recognizing that there was a gap in communication for small flight departments. You know, the NBAA, of course, was just wanting to support them. And one of those ways is helping create the Small Operator Learning Series.
Let's talk now about a few specific SOLS modules, Noah.
One of the big ones that we've been working on is the ABCs of LOA. So just learning the basics of what an LOA is, what LOAs you need for specific operations, and things such as that. And then part 2 will come out and we'll go into detail on how to get the LOA. What LOAs do you need when you're doing this or that? The reason I think that one's so important is because it kind of touches on what we've been talking about this whole time, how important it is for small flight departments to learn from each other. A lot of people don't understand what LOAs you need when you're doing a specific operation. So if there's someone out there who has done what you're looking to do, it's really all about learning from each other. And I think that's a really big one. And as well with the LOA series, there is the whys and hows of special authorization, which goes into details on how to get LOA. So I think this LOA 2-part session for SOLS is great. It's even better because we have a guide too. So after you hear about it and you learn about it, you can go back and you kind of have your own notes as well.
Joe, what's another SOLS module that can benefit small operators?
One that I particularly find valuable was also one that is a 2-part series, but it covers the topic of safety in small flight departments. The first being speaking with your principal expectations of safety, which was actually first published a couple years ago. And then the second part published more recently, which is titled Continuing a Road to a Safer Flight Operation. And I think it's helpful because managing a small flight department, there's so many different aspects that a manager is responsible for. But at the core, operating in a safe manner should be a top priority. While ultimately having a robust safety management system might be an ultimate goal, there's more simple ways to kind of start building a foundation for a safety management system that are attainable for small flight departments. And so between those two modules, they go through different ways that a small flight department manager can either increase or maintain the level of safety in their operation.
Dylan?
A big theme that we've focused on is communicating with your principal. And again, something that is not really taught in flight school, and you may not have learned at your last flying job, but especially as a manager of a small flight department, you're going to be communicating with the aircraft owner. Could be a high net worth individual, could be the chairman of the board, maybe it's just the admin of the executive. So understanding the dynamic of the best way to communicate with the principal is so crucial, but there isn't a lot of education on it. And so that was a topic we really wanted to focus on. As Joe mentioned, we talk about how do we talk about safety with the principal? What about budgeting? How do we do that? And then there's even more, we get into some really good discussions in just some of the basics. How do I call a meeting with the principal? Do I give them the agenda beforehand? Should I do it over the phone? All of these things to be an effective communicator. Do I use acronyms from aviation? How do I translate into business speak what we're going to do? So there's a lot of principles that we cover. The bottom line is, just like everything else in business aviation, it's very dynamic. One principle is completely different than another. They may not want an email. They may only want a phone call or to meet in person. And so there's a lot of that kind of nuance that we try and get at to help you succeed in communicating the important information to your principal to run your small flight department effectively.
What subjects are under consideration for future modules in the Small Operator Learning Series, Dylan?
Here's a hot topic right now that we are really looking at, and it's a challenge for many in business aviation, and that is, how do we hire pilots when there is a big backlog at the training center? Maybe we've even identified a pilot that we want, but we can't get them into initial training for 10 months. So what do? We're in this chicken and egg scenario. So we're going to be exploring conversations with insurance professionals. How do we communicate these issues with the underwriters? How can we find ways around hiring people and then having them sit for months on end while we wait for training? It's a real hot topic in the industry right now, and there isn't a real clear solution. So we're excited to explore that.
I know that attracting young people to business aviation is another concern for small operators, Noah.
That's something we've discussed a good bit, learning how to get the young talent to you. Where do I find someone who has the hours and is young that we could hire in our flight department? But then how do we retain that? How do we keep them from going to the airlines? So that's one topic that we've thought about discussing a lot, but there's no shortage of topics that we could discuss and that we want to discuss. It just depends on what's pertinent at the time of recording.
Another topic that is continually advancing is flight data management. And that's one that we're looking to hopefully produce a SOLS module on in the near future. The idea of something that larger flight operations have been doing to manage safety and identify any potential areas of improvement in their operation is through the use of FOQA type programs with the use of flight data recorders. But with the way the technology has been advancing, that's becoming more accessible to smaller flight departments, and then figuring out ways to tap into that technology and use it for the betterment of individual small flight operations. SOLS has been a great success because of the support of the NBAA and NOAA and his team, but also the numerous great group of volunteers that participate in the Small Flight Department Subcommittee and the Greater Domestic Operations Committee. Have a great group of passionate volunteers that contribute to these resources to put out to the greater membership. So it just wanted to acknowledge them as well and all the great work that they're doing.
Noah, I believe there's another benefit as well to small operators who view and participate in these modules.
Yes, because the NBAA has seen how great this series has been. The CAM governing board decided that you can get CAM credits for listening to the Small Operator Learning Series. It's a great way to learn about small operators, also a great way to get your CAM credits.
Indeed. Dylan, how can NBAA members help develop new SOLS modules?
If you'd like to be a part of crafting the conversation for the next Small Operator Learning Series, Joe and I would welcome you to join the Small Flight Department Committee, we have a call every month where we discuss these issues, strategize, and determine what kind of educational content we're going to be producing. Anyone that's in a small flight department is welcome to join the call. We'd love to have your participation and help us to create valuable resources for folks in our industry.
Sounds like a great way to contribute to our industry and help out other small flight operations like yours. To learn more about the Small Operator Learning Series and SOLS modules on these and other topics, such as insurance, budgeting, and dealing with bad actors, head over to nbaa.org/SOLS. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Remember, you can subscribe to all Flight Plan episodes at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts, including by asking your virtual assistant or connected device. Of course, you can also download Flight Plan directly from NBAA.org. I'm Rob Finfrock. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for a new episode of Flight Plan.
Sending out 3500.
All right, we got him inside. We're still on 170, cover 5.